Well, the second part I promised is to speak briefly about the reform of the reform. So 3 years ago we created the European financial supervisory bodies. As I said, I will do this quickly, but we commissioned 2 studies as a parliament. I heard that the one who drafted the study for the Commission was was a speaker here. So in our studies and analysis, we found lots of things, but I will concentrate on 6 key points. So first, the ESAs, they fulfilled their legislative mandate. So when they were asked to draft a delegated act, they did, and they did this quite satisfactorily. But one has to say they're disappointed in a whole number of areas where already the de la Rosière report and then the following legislation suggested that the ESAs should get real power. They disappointed when it came to detecting breaches of European law. So they didn't detect basically any breaches of European law. So we all know that lots of things written in European financial services legislation on a European level is not implemented in the realities of financial markets. I can give you loads of examples. My favorite one is consumer protection rules in the area of MiFID. There are all the conflict of interest regulation in MiFID. Well, there are lots of problems in this in financial markets. Everybody knows this. There are lots of testing customers in order to detect this. But the ESAs didn't act. And the same is with binding mediation. There were very few cases of binding mediation, although we know that national supervisors often do not agree. But the power for binding mediation between them for the ESAs was more or less never used. Then crisis management. So in a situation of a severe financial crisis, the supervisory powers could be given to the ESAs. Although we were all the time in a severe financial crisis, there was never given any power to the ESAs. And lastly, the consumer protection mandate, very little activity was developed. Most in ESMA, very little in IOPA and EBA. So, now, why was this? The main reason why they didn't use their powers, although they were given in the law, was because in order to trigger a certain activity in the ESAs, they need the supervisory board to take a decision. Who sits in the supervisory board of the ESAs? The national supervisors. So now tell me, which national supervisors likes to be reminded by a European supervisor that you don't follow European law? Very little. So, and we have the crow principle. In Germany we have a saying, one crow doesn't pick in the eye of another crow. This is very true. And this is exactly true for national supervisors. If they sit in a European supervisory board, they know exactly when they trigger a process on a potential breach of European law in one country, they might be next. And therefore they don't take these decisions. And that is one of the critical reasons why lots of the things, Monsieur de la Rosière, you invented, could not be triggered in the reality of the ESAs. So the powers were there, but the decisions to trigger these powers were normally not taken. When there was legislative mandates, that was different, because in European law, if you put there, you have to write a delegated act, they have to write a delegated act. They don't need a decision from their supervisory board. So therefore, there was not such a problem. The same, the ESAs experience with access to data. You cannot do European supervision if you don't have data. Basically, you need real-time data in order to do effective supervision. But again, the same. So in the regulations for the ESAs, it says they have the right to ask for all data they want. The national supervisors have to organize the data the European supervisor needs. Very good. But in order to use this power, you need again a decision from the supervisory body and from the supervisory board. So if they would a national supervisor take with their colleagues the decision to provide data to a European supervisor? Well, perhaps, but rather not, because it creates work and it creates less opacity. And therefore, again, very often the European supervisors couldn't get access to the data they really needed, although they had the right to request whatever they wanted. Well, then the ESRB, the European Systemic Risk Board. There's a lot to be said about it, but the main thing is it was created only with half of the staff which was originally envisaged. It was created at the European Central Bank, which has advantages and disadvantages. But one could say the ESRB was during the last years rather a talking shop, a useful place of exchange, but certainly not a macro supervisory regulator. They were also created in order to prevent crisis, but created in a period of crisis. So therefore lots of things they could have done in order to prevent a new crisis. If they would have enacted that now or suggested it now, it would perhaps have made the current crisis worse. So therefore for the ESRB there was much less space to act. In general, one can say that the European supervisory system had a very complex micro-supervision process triggered, but there was very little macro-supervision. I'm very critical of this because I think the macro factors were absolutely critical in order to understand how we got into this crisis. And on the macro level, very little happened. So we have done very little so far in order, for instance, to break pro-cyclical developments. We have not really done a lot of changes to the accounting standards, which were one of the critical factors for the crisis in my eyes. And so the IASB on the global level has resisted any fundamental changes after the crisis. We have not enacted in the housing markets loan-to-value ratios and the like, which could have been flotating with the business cycle. So all these macro tools, I could give more examples of that, there has not happened very much. And that's a pity. But well, on the micro level, a lot of things have happened. And then all the ESAs have severe budget constraints because their budgets are part of the budget of DG Markt on the European level. And they are therefore indirectly also victims of cuts of the European budget. Although their budget was increased, after long fights, the Parliament managed to increase their budgets, but still, if you look into these bodies and see the number of people there, they are 100 plus each. So if you compare that with the financial sector they are supposed to supervise, if you look at the seniority of the staff, if you go into the rooms of of the different ESAs, you are surprised how young people are there. So they are certainly rather the age of the rows behind rather than the rows here. So and look now, if you want to supervise these people, how serious will you be taken if there is 20 years of seniority gap between the responsible people and the national supervisors and in the banks and you as European? Nothing against young people, not at all. But the point is there, it shows something. It shows something, how attractive are these jobs, how well are they paid, and is this, I think at the end, on the highest level of control, we should put very strong people. and it was obviously not easy for the ESAs to attract them. And that's also something to be taken very seriously. So now we voted now in ECON a lot of proposals what should be done in order to take consequences of this analysis. So the key point first is that we want to give the ESAs and in particular their management bodies, so not the supervisory board, but their management bodies, much more powers to trigger processes. So they can launch mediation, binding mediation. They can trigger stress tests. They should be able to call on access to data without having to ask the national supervisors in their supervisory board. Also, we want that the ESAs get by definition and also the ESRB direct access to the same supervisory data as the national supervisors. We would like in the ESRB to have an executive chairperson who is not the chair of the ECB. I think we made a big mistake when we created the ESRB to give this to Mario Draghi. Not because it's Mario Draghi, that's not the point, but there's a natural conflict of interest. If you are the same person who has to look to macroeconomic and macro financial stability and at the same time you are chair of the directorate of the ECB. There is obviously one critical problem, that monetary policy is one of the potential reasons for macroeconomic problems. So therefore, having the same person in control of both seems to me a really difficult choice. I personally would have had even a certain tendency to create a really independent institution. There are pros and cons in this, but what's clear is that there shouldn't be the same person in a chairing position. So then we suggest that the ESRB should be able to issue recommendations also to the ECB, which they can't do at the moment. Then we would like the chairpersons of the ESAs to get a whole number of direct decision-making powers. So they should be able to ask for data. They should be having the possibility to vote on the board of supervisors. They should be able to initiate peer reviews, and they should be invited to ECOFIN meetings, which they are not at the moment. So we would like to strengthen, therefore, the chairpersons who are truly European actors and not representatives of national supervisors. Well, and then we would like the supervisory authorities to have an own budget line independent from DG Markt, like the Data Protection Agency, so that their funding are not dependent anymore on the size of the budget of DG Markt. Well, we had to accept some renationalization of voting rules in the EBA. This was basically a result when we created the common supervisor at the ECB. The United Kingdom used this opportunity in order to change the voting rules at EBA. And the Parliament is now a bit provocatively asking to revert this decision, which can now be changed under majority rule, while the creation of the common supervisor at the ECB was for technical reasons a consensus operation. I'm sure the UK doesn't like that, but I think it is important to have more streamlined decision making and that change to the EBA decision making is a weakening of the EBA and should be corrected, and in any case it should not be transferred to insurance and markets. Well, then we think that we have to empower the ESAs to monitor much more closely differences in national legislation, and also to identify by key variables rent-seeking behavior in certain sub-markets. So the European financial markets, in some parts of the markets, are still quite fragmented, and we think that detecting that systematically could help to reduce rents in the sector. Well, perhaps I finish lastly. The ESRB should be represented directly at the Economic and Financial Committee, which is a bit something like the secret government of the European Union in financial matters. An institution few people know. It's the preparatory body for the ECOFIN. There are no cameras. This is where the real power is. So, and there, I think it's very important that the ESRB is present. And well, these are only the key changes we propose. You can read the report on my website, and we are now curious what the Commission will propose, but their analysis goes in the same direction. Legally, these proposals have to be confirmed in plenary. Once they are confirmed in plenary, the Commission has 1 year time to make these proposals, or they have to give reasons why they don't. This is the so-called process of a legislative initiative report, which gives a de facto legislative initiative right to the Parliament. So this is a report which is harder than a normal initiative report. So the Commission is required to respond or to give good reasons why they don't. So I'm quite hopeful that many of these proposals will then be made by the Commission, and we are in discussion with the services, and they share basically our analysis. But we may not be naive. Afterwards there will be tough negotiations with the Council, and lots of that they will not like, so this will not be easy. But the basic analysis that lots of powers which we together gave the ESAs were not used in the real world, this is something which you cannot refute, and therefore normally the Council should be ready to concede at least on a part of the points.